Have you ever felt completely certain about something, only to have the world shatter that certainty? For the German defenders of the Atlantic Wall in 1944, certainty was everything. They had spent years turning the coast of France into an impenetrable fortress. Concrete bunkers, barbed wire, anti-tank obstacles, and millions of mines were scattered everywhere. It was a truly vast defense, built on the belief that nothing could breach it. They watched the choppy, gray English Channel every single day, and nothing ever happened. The sheer monotony of the waiting was their greatest enemy, and ironically, it was also their greatest weakness. The soldiers knew a massive Allied invasion was coming. It was the worst-kept secret of the war. But where and when? Hitler and his high command were absolutely convinced the main thrust, the real blow, would be at Calais, where the channel was narrowest. This conviction created a fatal flaw, a deep, relaxed sense of security in the Normandy sector. Many of the troops stationed here were young, untested, and far from the elite units busy fighting on the bloody Eastern Front. They were simply counting the days. On the night of June 5, 1944, the weather was brutal. Gale-force winds and churning seas. Even Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the genius responsible for beefing up this entire defense, was back in Germany celebrating his wife's birthday. The German leadership was utterly complacent, believing the foul weather made any landing impossible. They were sure they had time. That small, crucial moment of human assumption, that belief in certainty, is exactly what the Allies capitalized on. The quiet confidence on the German side was about to be replaced by utter chaos. The men in those coastal bunkers were soundly asleep, and history was already moving in silence right above them, preparing to change their lives forever. The first sign that the impossible had happened wasn't the sound of ships. It was the eerie, sudden silence of their own communications going dead, quickly followed by the distant rumble of thousands of planes overhead. Then the terror truly began. Paratroopers, thousands of them, were dropping out of the sky into the darkness behind the lines. Suddenly, the quiet, routine existence of the German garrisons was ripped apart by explosions and desperate close-quarters fighting in the darkness. Officers couldn't get clear reports, telephones were cut and roads were blocked. It was complete confusion, a terrifying disconnect between what they thought was happening and the overwhelming reality of the attack. When the sun finally began to rise on June 6th, the German defenders stared out at the sea and saw something no one had truly expected. A horizon filled with ships. Not just a few, but a never-ending armada. It was a sight that instantly broke the morale of many men who had believed their defenses were unbeatable. Suddenly, the threat wasn't just a distant possibility, it was an entire navy delivering a crushing blow. The heavy Allied naval bombardment that followed was a nightmare. Shells rained down for hours, shaking the very earth and burying men alive in their concrete bunkers. Imagine being trapped, knowing you couldn't move, and that every second could be your last. The key units that could have counterattacked quickly, the powerful Panzer divisions, were held back. Why? Because the German high command, still convinced that this was all just a massive diversion, wouldn't release them. They were waiting for the real invasion at Calais. This fatal delay meant the men fighting on the beaches were isolated, overwhelmed, and completely alone. They watched as wave after wave of Allied soldiers, tough and determined, streamed onto the sand. The fight was brutal, immediate, and utterly hopeless for many German soldiers who, only hours before, were complaining about the lack of excitement. Now they had more excitement than they could ever handle, facing the inevitable with desperate courage or sheer panic. As the day wore on, the initial shock gave way to a grim reality for the German defenders. The Atlantic Wall, their fortress, had been breached. The sheer scale of the Allied landings meant that even if they could push back one wave, another 10 were already behind it. The fighting was fierce, often hand-to-hand in the ruined villages and muddy fields behind the beaches. For many, it wasn't about victory anymore. It was about survival. Small groups of German soldiers found themselves cut off, fighting to the last bullet, or trying to find a way to retreat through a landscape swarming with the enemy. The hope of a decisive counterattack never materialized. The Panzer divisions, when they finally did move, were hampered by Allied air superiority. Every road was a death trap constantly strafed by fighter planes. What was meant to be a coordinated defense turned into a series of desperate, isolated skirmishes. The German soldiers, once confident in their fortifications, were now caught in a relentless vice. D-Day, from their perspective, wasn't just a battle. It was the beginning of the end. It was the moment they realized the tide had turned and the war was coming home. The invincible image of the German war machine had been shattered not just by Allied bravery, but by their own fatal miscalculations and the sheer overwhelming force brought against them. And that, my friends, is the D-Day story from a perspective often forgotten, the human cost and the crushing realization faced by the German soldiers who stood on that fateful shore. We hope this glimpse into their experience has given you a deeper understanding of this pivotal moment in history. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this video and found it insightful, please hit that like button, subscribe to Battle Echoes for more animated history, and leave us a comment below. We love hearing your thoughts and what historical events or stories you'd like us to cover next. Your support helps us bring more untold echoes from the past to life.